Hi, Syma. So another Science of the Times podcast. I think we're sort of managing about once a fortnight at the moment, but hopefully people are still tuning in.
Yeah, I'm sure they are. The numbers suggest they are, so that's great. And today's one is very close to my heart. So it's all about bugs, bacteria.
I know, and I mean, but a different kind of take on bacteria in a way to you, right? You're kind of more interested in membranes and whatever, but this is about whole ecosystems of bacteria.
Yeah, it's a kind of a hybrid of you and me in a way,
That's
right?
right. Yeah, no, I suppose that's right. And actually, I'm really excited to get these two on because they're two early career researchers. They're both postdocs. They're both recently finished their PhDs, and they're both super enthusiastic about the microbiome. Do you want to explain what that is a little bit? I mean, they'll go into more detail, obviously.
Yeah, sure. So the microbiome is basically the population of bacteria in any given sort of, so it could be on our skin. The gut microbiome is the bacteria that live in our gut, for example. And it's not the exciting thing is that it's not just one species, it's a whole sort of world of bacteria and how they live and interact with each other as large communities.
And it turns out they're quite important.
Enormously important, yes, absolutely. And we turns out our relationship with them is possibly, well, is for sure more complex than we initially thought.
So I remember hearing a story years ago when I kind of came up with the microbiome was sort of becoming popular in biology. And someone had done this study. They wanted to know when a new baby was born and it got passed around between lots of relatives, whether those relatives, started to get a more similar microbiome. And they did this big analyses where they kind of, worked out how many people lived in each house, how many people they saw, whether they had any dogs as pets, all of this sort of stuff in the analyses. And they came to the conclusion from this study that no, actually having a baby didn't have any impact on the microbiome. But what they did find is any family that got a dog, within 6 weeks, everyone had the dog's microbiome.
Really? That's amazing.
Anyway, should we get them on?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So we have two guests today who are both are from Finland, no less, but not in Finland at the moment. Eveliina, would you like to start by introducing yourself a little and saying where you are at the moment?
Yes, thank you for having me here. So I'm Eveliina and I'm currently in Zurich. I've moved here just a couple of months ago after many years in Oxford and started an early career fellowship here.
No, well, congratulations. I hope you're enjoying it. And Aura, how about you?
Well, hello, and thanks for having me too. I am Aura, and I'm a fellow at Oxford, and also a long-time collaborator of Eveliina's, and we study the same things.
And you two both love something called the microbiome, don't you? So
Absolutely.
I wonder if I don't mind which one of you, who wants to start off by telling our listeners what the microbiome is and why we should, why don't one of you tell us what it is and then the other one can tell us why we should be interested in it.
Okay, well, I can go ahead. So the microbiome, specifically the gut microbiome, what we work on, that is a collection of microbes that live in the gut, and it consists of bacteria, viruses, and more. And I'll hand over to Aude to explain why we should study the microbiome to begin with.
Yeah, so microbiome is really cool. I've completely fallen in love with this study topic because it's not just a kind of part of our body, like an organ, but it's also an ecosystem. It's like an ecosystem inside of you, and actually is one of the most diverse ecosystems on Earth. Only more diverse ecosystems are soil microbiomes, but still, it's very, very strange organ because it's kind of like very influential for our body. It influences our immunity and our brain and our behavior and the foods we can eat. Our digestion it really plays a big part as part of our body. But unlike other organs in our body, it can spread between us. It doesn't kind of stay in one individual, but in a social contact, when we hug and kiss and talk to each other, we exchange microbes, and that makes it kind of a leaky part of ourselves. And I think that's very fascinating, and we should be very much studying it because of that. And also because of this reason, it is not just a biomedically valuable thing to study because it links to a lot of our health and disease, but it is also a way of bringing ecological perspective into medicine and biomedical sciences.
Very cool. Syma, how's your microbiome? Is it pickled?
Yeah.
Possibly less pickle than yours, Tim. So, all right. So, just for our listeners and viewers, so not only do we have this, as you said, this ecosystem that lives within us, but we actually can't survive without it, right?
Yeah, it's really like a very crucial part of us, and they can't survive much without us either. So we are really like tied together to the extent that I would even consider their cells of our body almost like our own cells.
And Eveliina, is it just like chance that you're both Finnish, or did you grow up? Do you have very strange microbiomes in Finland because all you eat is fish and no vegetables?
Well, that's actually not quite true. We do eat a lot of root vegetables. But yeah, maybe we have a very root vegetable heavy microbiome. No, it's just by
Sad
chance.
salad.
Yeah.
Yeah, but actually, something that Evelina's research really much kind of circulates around is that Finnish microbiomes are kind of interesting for science because Finland is suffering from a lot of allergy and autoimmune disease, and there's been a lot of research on Finnish microbiomes and how to make them richer, how to enhance the microbiome health of children, especially because that would make them less allergic. And that there's been really cool research showing that it's contact with nature, with ecosystems around you, and contact with other people that really influences your health through these microbes.
So what I guess I don't have a real feeling for is how diverse are the microbiomes between individuals, and how far away do you have to go before you see a difference? So, for example, would my microbiome be the same as someone who I share a house with, or would it be completely different?
Well, I mean, it's a mixture. Actually, our microbiomes are very individualized. So if we look at your microbiome over time, it will sort of have a signature. But actually, even within individual microbiomes will be changing all the time. And this is most drastic in early life when the microbiome develops in the first place. But even during adulthood, even when nothing really changes, many things still seem to change in the microbiome. So yeah, no two microbiomes will ever be the same.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's true that with whom you live, you do have more similar microbiome.
Yeah, for sure.
It's more than your own genes or your diet or your background, even more than your lifestyle. It really influences your microbiome with whom you are in contact with.
But how do you study it? I mean, do you like cut open stomachs to like hoik it out, or do you go down the throat, or do you collect feces? I mean, because it's kind of inside us. It's a kind of key part of it. You don't want to disturb it too much either, do you?
Well, me and Eveliina both have this cutest ever study systems. We've been studying wild mice and their microbiome, where we can kind of profile the bacterial communities living in their gut by just sequencing DNA from their poo. So we don't have to cut open the mice. We can just collect poo, and then we can, measure other things about the mice. We even track their behavior and the social interactions. Or Eveliina follows baby mice from when they first emerge from their holes, and then see how their microbiome changes with them growing up.
But the microbiome that we do get in the poo samples, we do know that it's not exactly, one-to-one representation of what we have in the gut. And maybe we should be talking of fecal microbiome studies. But yeah, the fecal-based studies are the most common one in the field of microbiome. And this is because, of course, this sample type is completely non-invasive, really. And yeah, anything beyond that gets complicated very quickly.
And so you kind of build up this picture of individuals having these bacteria basically living inside our guts, inside us, different species, different types. And I guess from what you're saying, there's a great deal of heterogeneity in them. I also study bacteria from a very different scale. And I'd always thought they were pretty aggressive and were always in constant battle with each other. So in the microbiome, have they found a kind of a peace and a way to live in sort of, a sort of a, under some kind of truce? Or are they still fighting?
I think they're not at all in peace. They're fighting a lot. Don't you agree, Eveliina?
Yeah,
They're a
absolutely.
highly competitive system. But that's actually good for us, because what matters for us is that our microbiome is kind of diverse and stable. And actually, these kind of competitive ecosystems tend to be more stable than ones where everybody cooperates, because then they can kind of take over each other's roles and do things for it that the other, if someone goes extinct, someone else will take over their ecological niche immediately. And they do battle, they do compete, but the thing that that they are most influenced by is like control mechanisms influenced that are like imposed by the host organism, like our own immune system, for example, picks and chooses and selects a little bit who gets to thrive there. So there's a strong police force kind of controlling this system.
And in your mice, how important is the microbiome? So you said it might affect behavior. Does it kind of affect how it, how kind of bold or shy you are? Does it affect who you hang out with, how social you are, if mice are in fact social? Does it influence how long you live for? What can you tell from these wild mice that you're looking at, both of you?
Do you want to? Yeah.
Well, I think this is more like your research, because Eveliina's really studying the consequences of microbiome variation.
Yeah, I just wanted to hand over to you regarding the sort of behavior part. I suppose when it comes to behavior, there's a lot of sort of sexy research out there looking at links between microbiome and behavior, but not always can we kind of distinguish who's actually influencing who. But yeah, I mean, the microbiome is certainly important to really all aspects of our existence.
Give us an example then. Let's have some concrete. Because people like to say that, it's really important. But
yeah, exactly. So I mean, the easiest examples come from these lab mouse studies where we have mice without any kind of microbes, where we can really show causally that the microbiome is important. So for example, mice born without microbes, they will have a hyper-reactive stress response system. So the way they respond to various different stresses will be sort of hyperactive. And interestingly, if we colonize these mice in early life in a very specific time window, then we can sort of fine-tune the stress response system so that it's not so hyperactive. So this clearly shows that the microbiome is involved in how something like our stress response system works.
Yes, and then by extension also our behavior and personality. There's these very fresh studies coming out just now showing that if you take one of these empty germ-free mice that don't have a microbiome, and then you give them a microbiome of a very active mouse or very passive mouse, then their personality also changes accordingly. They will become more active personalities. So it's quite sci-fi, in my opinion, that you can change someone's personality by just giving them a gut transplant.
Yeah, so just thinking about that. So, I mean, so this is something that goes beyond our genetics. It's something that we can control then with our environment. So can you, I don't know, sort of all these gut sort of microbiota foods that we have now and encourage to encourage the sort of our healthy gut. Would these change or have any impact on your personality?
Yeah,
I mean, maybe theoretically, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we know that people also like have that. There's been these long-standing notions in biology that certain diets make you happier or more like less happy, for example. That could
they maybe involve beer, Syma.
Yeah. Also, there is this long-standing notion that loneliness is related to shorter lifespan. So people who have less social contacts live shorter lives. And then this has been studied by psychologists a lot because we think it's a psychological thing. But there's also a lot to be said about whether some part of it is just a biological thing, because we know that social isolation depletes your microbiome heavily, and then that can also expose you to disease. And then if you're very, very socially connected, you gain a diverse microbiome. In humans, it's been shown, for example, that the number of social contacts you have is related to your microbiome diversity.
So if I was to shift my diet, for example, and start eating lots of salad, is it possible I become a real introvert?
I suppose so. Yeah. I think changing salad will just increase the quantity of water in your body. Really, nothing to do with the microbiome.
It'll dilute you, Tim.
Yes.
Okay, but a bit more seriously, there have been cases, I think, and I know that you might not be experts on this bit, but perhaps you can comment where there's been microbiome transplants in humans, actually through fecal transplants, and that's actually changed character, people's personality, but also like factors about their level of obesity and what have you, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
and importantly, also the if you get the microbes you have also influence what foods you have cravings for. So it kind of like if you, for example, I don't know if you have any friends who have gotten like very much into sourdough baking or fermenting.
I did in the pandemic, yeah.
Yes. So there's a little bit of a kind of an addiction forming there, because the more sour foods you eat, the more you kind of support these bacteria that thrive in sour conditions, and they also influence your brain and make you crave for more sour foods.
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm going to cut out that grapefruit juice. And so, yeah, how accurate can you get? Are there particular species of bacteria that we know play a major role in a microbiome? Because as you said, it's incredibly complicated. There are sort of, tens of thousands, if not more, different species. There's vast numbers of bacteria in our gut. Are we at a point where we can sort of say, okay, these species are good ones, and coming up with some medicine or some inoculants that allow people to develop or to feed or to seed particular species of microbiome in the gut, or these are the ones that tend to be correlated with shorter lives or something? Are we, or a craving to eat food that's unhealthy? Are we getting to that point yet?
Well, I think the issue is that it seems which microbes are important to you might be quite different from the ones that might be important to me or useful for me. So it's so context dependent, and it really does depend on the rest of the community. So just by taking extra, I don't know, lactobacillus doesn't necessarily lead to anything, because it really depends on what you already have in your gut microbiome and how you with your body sort of interact with the microbiome. So I think this is a big part of the issue in terms of identifying specific microbes. There's certainly some microbial species that kind of pop up in loads of studies as the more sort of beneficial ones, but there's also a good amount of variation, and not in all studies do they seem to be so important. And I really do think this is largely because it's not just one bacterium we're dealing with the whole community, and so it's a complex system, and just by changing one thing we can't actually change the whole thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you notice when you go backpacking in India, if it's any one of us here living in Europe, you'll probably get sick quite quickly. And it's not because you're infected necessarily by pathogenic bacteria. It's just because you're not used to the local symbionts. Like, they might be very healthy bacteria for the local people there, but it's just your system can't deal with them because your immune system didn't develop with these bacteria. And there's also, that is why we are interested in these kind of what we call emergent community properties of the microbiome. That means not just who is there, but rather things like diversity, stability, the similarity of microbiome between individuals, because those things are linked to health, and those we can control even without knowing which exact bacterial species you have.
So I wonder if, thinking of what you're saying, like at the moment, we sort of genomically profile people. We try and get an understanding of our hereditary characteristics. I'm wondering in the future if this could also be a profiling of people is done through a microbiome. It's another way. It's not hereditary or anything, but it's characterizing someone's microbiome can tell you additional things about their personality or indeed their health. Do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, I think
Well,
they're already using
yeah.
as like a risk assessment. Like you can predict someone's risk for colorectal cancer or something
Yeah.
from the microbiome.
Yeah, they're already being used, as Auto was saying, and I mean, currently, I think it's predominantly in the commercial side of things, but more increasingly also in the healthcare systems as well.
So I used to just blame my genes if I did anything
Yeah, now you
kind
have
of wrong.
thousands
Now
of
I can
meetings
blame
to
my
take.
genes and my microbiome.
And your friends from whom you'll be
And
getting the
oh,
microbes.
great. So Syma actually is responsible for all my bad behavior
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
got some of her microbiome by sharing a pint with her in a pub once. Is that
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you managed
so?
by yourself in China recently, no, Tim?
Yeah, and actually, it's really interesting. So I was in China and I was eating a very different diet to the diet I ate here, and I kind of did get an upset stomach, but it didn't. I wasn't really ill, if you know what I mean. It was like so. It was probably just
Ecological
it was
turmoil.
the chicken foot and snail soup, which was delicious. Which I think probably tipped me over the edge there. But I want to come back to the mice, right? So you can wander around woods, you can collect mouse poo. I know you put out traps, actually quite clever traps to catch mice and collect the fecal samples from them. And then you kind of genotype those to look for you look for the bacteria, the genomes
Yes.
that you've got in that fecal stuff. But surely all mice are like the same. How, you telling me there's like outgoing mice and there's shy mice and there's like social mice and asocial mice.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
they
they
have
come in
very
all kinds of variety.
they have very different personalities. And actually, what's interesting about these mice I study here in Oxford, they're wood mice, the brown ones living in the woods, is that they have such strong social preference patterns that they actually sometimes actively avoid their neighbors and then actively hang out with someone else who lives otherwise a bit further away. And that's pretty important for us because that allows us to build social networks for mice which are not completely just who is where in space. It's not just like, oh, you're connected to your neighbor because you live nearby, but it's like you have friends who live further away from you, but you still sometimes meet them. And that's important because that allows us to see which bacteria actually transmit through direct social contact and which through by just sharing space and hanging out in the same places.
So some mice are more social than others.
Yes, and some mice also, some are loners and some are social, but even the social ones, some of them are these kind of in the middle of a social cluster mice who all of their friends are friends with each other. You know what I mean? Those kind of
A mouse clique.
mouse clique, and then some mice have friends who are very not friends with each other, like from very different social circles. And that's actually important for the microbiome too, because if you're connected to others who all are part of the same clique, you get the same bacteria from all of them. But if you're connected to others from very different parts of the social neighborhood, then you get different bacteria from all of them.
But Eveliina, how do you know where a mouse is in the woods?
In our system.
Oh, okay, in our system. But you spent some time working on that system as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, in the woods, there are these loggers that basically take a note of every single mouse that goes past. So
How does it know what mouse is which
yeah,
mouse?
yeah. So all the data that we collect is longitudinal. So we capture the mice and eventually we release them. But before we release them, we put a little chip under the skin, just the same you would put on a pet dog or a cat. And this chip will then be read by this logger. And we have loads of these loggers distributed in the woods, and you can match this with the time and yeah, with the individual, of course. And then through this, you will know who was where and when.
Amazing. Syma.
Yeah, I'm just still trying to get my head around these little, inside all of us, these little communities of creatures that are living and sort of carrying out these different, this is going to sound like a really dumb question, but sort of how do we map the space they occupy, the expanse? And I think I was reading somewhere that the microbiomes we have, one big advantage they have is they occupy niches, right? Which prevents sort of parasites and things getting in.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
right? What I was wondering is how do we map that? How do we understand what to what extent they're sort of what's their terrain, if that makes sense?
You mean like within a microbiome, like within
Yeah.
a microbial ecosystem?
Within an organism.
Yeah, well, that's $1,000 question because the ecological interactions between bacteria are practically impossible to observe. So there's been a lot of clever nerds trying to develop ways of analyzing who is competing with who is in a more like helpful symbiotic relationship with whom, from basically just data on their where like their covariation and but then they also do these clever experiments where we can grow these bacteria in the lab on a petri dish, and then you can grow them alone, and then you can grow them in pairs, and you can see whether they grow better in pairs or alone, and that's where you know whether they're competing from the same resources and like kind of limiting each other, or whether they're actually depending on each other.
And and is what you find the sort of patterns that you find in mice, are they similar to the patterns that you're finding in children, for example, Evelyn? Is there any generality here at all, or is it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, if we just look at the development of the microbiome, so mammals are essentially born without microbes. This is what we think, and this is certainly what I think. And so in early life, we quickly have to somehow form this microbiome, and this is driven by various processes. And it seems to be, even though we then end up having very different microbiomes between, not just between individuals, but definitely between different species, like us and koalas will have quite different microbiomes, but the process, the sort of different types of changes seem to be quite similar. So obviously, since we start with nothing, for example, diversity will increase, but also it seems that we start with quite different microbiomes between individuals within a given species, so human babies, for example. But then as we get a little bit older, we start to look a little bit more similar to each other. So these sort of processes are quite conserved across different species.
Yeah, and
So,
also,
sorry, Aaron.
yeah. Yeah, it says that humans and mammals have this cool thing that they also control their microbiome by at the same time controlling what microbes they get exposed to in the environment, and then inside of their body is controlling who gets to actually establish there. So for example, when you're pregnant, you modify your microbiome to be such that it's beneficial for the baby, so that the mother's microbiome shifts to be one that is good to give to the baby. And then when the baby is born, you feed the baby milk, and actually a human and mammal milk contains a lot of compounds that are actually feeding the bacteria inside the baby and not really the baby. So it's
Wow.
like a selectively trying to modify the microbiome to be good for the baby and to protect it and help immune development.
Wow. So you're really building up this picture of us not really being a single entity, right? It's not, I'm not just Syma, I'm Syma and my microbiome, right?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is what I love about microbiome science. It's really kind of challenging our biological ideas of individuality and ecology and what it means to be a species.
And actually, I mean, one of the things we haven't talked about, there's something called the gut-brain axis, isn't there? And the vagus nerve, and
Yeah.
that's a two-way thing. So, as you say, the microbiome can influence us and our personalities, but and as you kind of say, we can influence our microbiome as well through our choice of food and whether we wash our hands and whether I let my dog lick my face, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and whom we interact with.
Yeah.
That's the cool thing, is that our social choices influence which microbes we have. And then there are microbes that also influence our social behavior. So there can be like feedback loops between sociality and microbiome. And some people have even suggested that this might have been one of the forces driving evolution of sociality in the early stages. Like, because you get beneficial microbes, and then these microbes might enhance your fitness as a species, or even just make you more social.
We're running out of time. Have you got a final question or two, Syma?
No. I mean, just a comment on, I guess, because we have never ever been, because bacteria came first. So we have only always evolved in their presence, right?
Yes.
And so, yeah, I think that's probably worth pointing out to our listeners that there's this thing goes, this sort of symbiosis, if you like, goes a way back from our very origins.
Yes, and it's part of the development as well.
Yeah, and just to point out, like the microbiome clearly is super important. Hopefully, we've managed to convince that. But we do have mice in the lab that are germ-free. You know, they've been germ-free for generations, and I mean, they are a little bit weird, but they still look like mice. They still have a level of immune system. It's not all about the microbiome. That's just what I want to say. I don't want to give the impression that, without the microbiome, there was nothing. So.
Sure. And any advice to our listeners? I know we're not a self-help podcast, but any kind of, having studied it, any insights that you kind of think, oh yeah, that's kind of cool, I'm going to change my behavior?
Well, so I suppose the current consensus when it comes to, for example, food choices, I mean, diet is one of the key, if not the key driver of the microbiome. And so when it comes to food choices, what seems to be the consensus is that eating a very diverse plant-based diet, supports the microbiome. But to be honest, I mean, we really don't know. It seems to be, it varies a lot between individuals what works for who, and who knows what the consequences will be ultimately.
Yeah, and I would also like to advise people to not isolate themselves from touch too much, because a lot of this healthy microbiome diversity comes from like social contact, and sometimes even just talking to someone's face is enough to actually spread microbes. But especially all kinds of touch, hugging and kissing and being together really has the power to change your microbiome to be more diverse and more resilient and to the better. And why that's important is that this social contact spreads the microbes that cannot tolerate oxygen. And these you can't get from environment. You can only get them from other people and from your dog, probably.
So pick your friends carefully. That's our ultimate advice.
What a great way to end. Pick your friends carefully. Thank you so much, Eveliina and Aura. That's absolutely fascinating. Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Wow, Tim, so that was amazing. So now we know all about the intricacies of biomes, or do we?
Clearly a lot to learn, clearly incredibly complicated, right? But I mean, fascinating fascinating that they can tell whether a mouse is like social or asocial, but B, then link it to aspects of the bacteria living in its stomach. I mean, it's just it's astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost a little bit Star Trek-y, when they'd go off to different planets and something would sort of invade and infect them and then start behaving in a different way. But it turns out that actually our microbiomes impact aspects of our personality. I hadn't realized quite to what extent that was a thing. That's incredible.
No, I agree with you. It's kind of, who would have thought that the makeup of bacteria in your stomach can influence things going on in your brains, right? I mean, and influence, whether you're feeling kind of more outgoing or more introverted, and clearly interacting with our genome clearly changes with age and with life and with diet and what have you. It's like, yeah.
It's a little bit like, is it Harry Potter or one of these where they have this sort of juice that they drink and it makes them happy or whatever? You can imagine in the future having the happy bugs.
I think a potion is the word you're looking for.
Ah, that's right, the potion.
Juice.
I think it's called that though, honestly.
But you can get that, what's it called, yogurt or something? There's that, you can get products, right, that are full of bacteria that try and change. I don't know if they work or not.
Maybe we should do an experiment. You should give up the beer for this. No, maybe not.
No, I'd be worried my hair might change color. Look at that. You've got quite, for those people watching online, who are not watching online and listening on Amazon, and just go and look at your lovely new hairstyle. It's very good. Yeah. Anyway, I should probably stop waffling, but I think it's fascinating actually, and I think it's going to be a growth area, and I think it's some science to watch, because I think it really is actually quite. quite unexpected what people have found over the last few years, both
Yes.
in animals and people, about the role of bacteria.
I think so. I think so. And it's yeah, I think it'll impact the way we live and our diets and all sorts of things in the future. So this is going to be something that sort of becomes more and more important, as you said. But okay, so I think on that note, I should say see you for, well, I'm off to Greece next week.
Oh, well, have a good trip.
Thank
And
you.
I think we've got a podcast scheduled certainly for when you get back, and that's with a couple of colleagues of yours, I think.
That's right, yeah, and some of the discoveries they've done on the on pain and pain reception.
Wow, I'm gonna do some reading up on it, so I look forward
Thanks.
to that.
Cool. All right, Tim, take care.
Yeah, have a good weekend.